It began with a scream no one in Millbrook could explain, a deep, tearing sound that made cattle collapse and church bells ring on their own. Minutes later, they found him, a barefoot 8-year-old boy in a torn nightshirt, standing in the center of a field that had been frozen solid in the middle of July. His name was Timothy Caldwell, and what he did next would force the federal government to create its first classified supernatural research program. Timothy could move objects without touching them, kill people with his mind from over 100 yards away, and exist in multiple locations simultaneously while bending reality itself to his will. For 18 months, Dr. Samuel Harding, a Harvard-trained physician, documented abilities that challenged everything science understood about human consciousness and the nature of physical reality. The boy, who appeared normal, even charming, to casual observers, possessed powers that made him capable of stopping time, manipulating matter at the molecular level, and reading the thoughts of anyone who had ever been near him. 7 people died under impossible circumstances. Federal agents armed with experimental technology were rendered helpless. And when the government finally tried to capture Timothy for their weapons program, he simply dissolved into pure energy and vanished, leaving behind evidence that would remain classified for over 150 years. The War Department's files, leaked by a dying federal agent in 2019, revealed that Timothy wasn't alone. Dozens of children across the American frontier were manifesting supernatural abilities that the government desperately wanted to understand and control. These documents prove that human consciousness operates according to laws far more complex than modern science admits, and that there are individuals walking among us whose abilities transcend everything we think we know about the possible. What you're about to see challenges every assumption about the limits of human potential and reveals evidence that powerful institutions have spent centuries suppressing the truth about consciousness, reality, and the forbidden abilities that some people are born with. This isn't content for people who need reality to fit into comfortable scientific boxes. If you're looking for simple explanations that don't threaten your worldview, you should stop watching now. But if you're ready to confront documented proof that some humans can transcend the laws of physics, then subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell, because we're diving into archives that were never meant to see daylight. Before we begin this journey into America's most suppressed supernatural case, let us know in the comments what part of the world you're watching from. We're building a global community of people who aren't afraid to question the boundaries of what's humanly possible. The spring of 1866 arrived in Sedalia County, Missouri, with an unusual chill that seemed to settle deep into the bones of every living creature within a 20-mile radius of the Caldwell farm. According to meteorological records kept by the Missouri State Agricultural Society, temperatures that season dropped an unprecedented 15 degrees below historical averages, creating an atmospheric anomaly that local farmers would later describe as nature holding its breath. The rolling hills surrounding the modest homestead, normally alive with birdsong and the rustle of small woodland creatures, had fallen into an eerie silence that made even the hardiest frontiersmen uneasy. What the community didn't yet understand was that this unnatural quiet coincided exactly with the arrival of 8-year-old Timothy Caldwell, a pale, ethereal boy whose very presence seemed to bend the fundamental laws of physics in ways that 19th century science had no framework to comprehend. Timothy Caldwell appeared to be nothing more than a typical war orphan when he first stepped onto his Uncle Thomas's property in late March 1866, carrying a small cloth bundle that contained all his earthly possessions. According to the Caldwell family Bible, preserved in the Missouri State Historical Society archives, Timothy stood barely 4 feet tall, with platinum blonde hair that seemed to catch and hold light in unnatural ways, and pale blue eyes that neighbors would later describe as too knowing for a child. His uncle Thomas Caldwell, a stern man hardened by years of frontier life and the recent loss of his brother in the Civil War, initially saw Timothy as both a burden and an opportunity, another mouth to feed, but also an extra pair of hands for the endless work of maintaining a Missouri homestead. Thomas's wife, Sarah, a sharp-tongued woman whose own childlessness had left her bitter and resentful, viewed the boy's arrival with barely concealed hostility, treating him more like an unwelcome servant than a grieving nephew in need of comfort and stability. The first signs that Timothy was somehow different from other children began manifesting within days of his arrival, though the initial incidents were subtle enough that Thomas and Sarah dismissed them as coincidences or the products of an overactive imagination. According to Dr. Samuel Harding's private medical journals, discovered in 1987 during renovation of the old Sedalia Medical Building, neighbors began reporting strange occurrences almost immediately. Livestock found dead without any apparent cause, their bodies showing no signs of disease, injury, or predation. Sudden temperature drops that occurred only in Timothy's immediate vicinity, and most disturbing of all, small objects throughout the Caldwell household that seemed to move of their own accord during the night. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, whose property bordered the Caldwell farm, confided to Dr. Harding that she had witnessed Timothy standing motionless in the family garden while every chicken on her property simultaneously dropped dead, their bodies arranged in a perfect circle around the boy, as if responding to some invisible force emanating from his small frame. The local pastor, Reverend Joshua Mills, noted in his weekly sermon records that Timothy's presence in church caused the brass candlesticks on the altar to vibrate audibly during prayers, and that the temperature inside the sanctuary would drop so dramatically that congregants could see their breath forming clouds in the air. What Thomas and Sarah Caldwell couldn't have known was that their nephew's arrival had triggered a series of events that would soon attract the attention of the federal government's most classified research divisions. The boy's strange abilities, which seemed to grow stronger with each passing day, were beginning to create disturbances that extended far beyond the boundaries of their isolated farm. Military telegraph records, declassified in 2003 under the Freedom of Information Act, show that reports of unexplained atmospheric anomalies in Sedalia County had begun reaching Washington, D.C. as early as April 1866, prompting the War Department to dispatch a team of investigators to determine whether these phenomena posed a threat to national security. But what neither the government nor the local community realized was that Timothy Caldwell was just beginning to understand the true extent of his abilities, and that the quiet farmhouse where he now lived would soon become the epicenter of events that would challenge everything 19th century science believed about the nature of human consciousness and the fundamental laws of physical reality. The autumn of 1866 brought Dr. Samuel Harding face to face with phenomena that would fundamentally challenge his Harvard-trained understanding of medicine and natural philosophy. Dr. Harding, whose credentials from the Missouri Medical College and surgical experience during the Battle of Wilson's Creek had earned him recognition as the most qualified physician within 100 miles of Sedalia County, initially approached the reports about Timothy Caldwell with the skeptical eye of a man of science. However, his first encounter with the boy on October 14, 1866, during what should have been a routine medical examination, forced him to confront evidence that defied every principle of physics and biology he had studied. According to his encrypted medical notes, housed in the restricted archives of the Smithsonian Institution, Dr. Harding documented temperature fluctuations of up to 23 degrees Fahrenheit occurring within a 6-foot radius of Timothy's body, electromagnetic disturbances that caused his pocket watch to stop functioning, and most impossibly, the apparent levitation of medical instruments during the examination without any physical contact from the child. Dr. Harding's systematic documentation of Timothy's abilities began in earnest on November 1st, 1866, when he convinced Thomas Caldwell to allow him to conduct a series of controlled experiments at the farm under the pretense of studying unusual childhood developmental patterns, working with equipment borrowed from the Missouri State University's Natural Philosophy Department. Dr. Harding established protocols that would have impressed modern parapsychologists: carefully measured distances, multiple witnesses, and detailed environmental controls designed to eliminate any possibility of fraud or misperception. His findings, recorded in a cipher of his own design to prevent accidental discovery, documented abilities that seemed to violate fundamental laws of nature. Timothy could consistently move objects weighing up to 15 pounds across distances of up to 12 feet without any apparent physical mechanism, demonstrate knowledge of events occurring in distant locations with startling accuracy, and cause mechanical devices to malfunction simply through focused concentration. Most disturbing to Dr. Harding's scientific worldview was his discovery that Timothy's body temperature could fluctuate between a hypothermic 94 degrees Fahrenheit and a fever-inducing 108 degrees without any apparent ill effects, suggesting that the boy's physiology operated according to principles unknown to medical science. The breakthrough in Dr. Harding's research came on December 7, 1866, when he obtained one of the earliest photographic cameras available west of St. Louis and began documenting Timothy's abilities through the revolutionary medium of daguerreotype photography. The results, preserved in a lead-lined container discovered in Dr. Harding's estate in 1923, showed inexplicable visual distortions surrounding Timothy's figure, areas of apparent light bending, shadows that fell in impossible directions, and most remarkably, what appeared to be translucent geometric patterns extending outward from the boy's body like some form of visible energy field. Professional photographers from Kansas City, consulted secretly by Dr. Harding, confirmed that these anomalies could not be explained by any known photographic technique or chemical process of the era. The images were so scientifically unprecedented that Dr. Harding initially hesitated to include them in his documentation, fearing that they would undermine the credibility of his other, more conventional observations. However, when he discovered that the photographic anomalies occurred consistently across multiple sessions and with different camera equipment, he was forced to conclude that Timothy was somehow interacting with light itself in ways that challenged the fundamental assumptions of optics and physics. Perhaps most troubling to Dr. Harding was his growing realization that Timothy seemed to possess conscious control over abilities that appeared to strengthen with practice and emotional intensity. The boy demonstrated an intuitive understanding of his own capabilities that suggested intelligence far beyond his chronological age, often predicting the outcomes of Dr. Harding's experiments before they were conducted, and showing frustration when asked to perform demonstrations that exceeded his current limitations. During one particularly revealing session on December 15, 1866, Timothy accurately described the contents of a sealed letter that Dr. Harding had received from a colleague in Boston 3 days earlier, despite having no possible access to the correspondence. When pressed to explain how he had acquired this information, Timothy simply stated that he could see the writing floating in the air around you like smoke, a description that sent chills through Dr. Harding's scientific rationalism. What the doctor couldn't have anticipated was that his careful documentation of Timothy's abilities had begun attracting attention from forces far more powerful and secretive than the local medical community, and that his next series of experiments would reveal capabilities in the boy that would forever alter the trajectory of both their lives. The bitter winter morning of January 8, 1867, dawned with an otherworldly stillness that seemed to press down upon Sedalia County like a suffocating blanket, the temperature having plummeted to an unprecedented -23 degrees Fahrenheit, according to readings taken by the Missouri Weather Service. 5-year-old Mary Fletcher, the blacksmith's daughter known throughout the community for her infectious laughter and boundless energy, had been playing in the snow-covered yard behind her family's modest cabin when the impossible occurred. According to witness statements compiled by Sheriff William Crawford and preserved in the Pettis County Criminal Archives, Mary was observed by her mother through the kitchen window at exactly 2:47 p.m., building a small snowman approximately 100 yards from where Timothy Caldwell stood, motionless near the property line separating the Fletcher and Caldwell lands. What happened next would fundamentally alter Dr. Harding's understanding of Timothy's abilities and mark the beginning of a pattern of deaths that would terrorize the entire region for months to come. Mrs. Rebecca Fletcher's testimony, recorded in her own handwriting and stored in the Sedalia Historical Society's restricted archives, described a scene that defied every principle of natural law. She watched through her frost-covered window as Timothy stood perfectly still for nearly 3 minutes, his pale blue eyes fixed with laser-like intensity on her daughter's small figure in the distance. According to Mrs. Fletcher's account, Timothy raised his right hand slowly, as if reaching toward Mary across the vast expanse of snow-covered ground, and held it there with his fingers slightly curled, as though grasping something invisible. At that exact moment, Mary Fletcher collapsed face first into the snow, her small body convulsing briefly before falling completely motionless. Mrs. Fletcher's screams brought neighbors running from their homes, but by the time they reached the child, she was already dead, her body showing no signs of injury, violence, or any apparent cause for the sudden cessation of life. Most disturbing of all was the discovery that Mary's final position in the snow perfectly mirrored the gesture Timothy had been making with his outstretched hand, as if some invisible force had reached across the distance to claim her life. Dr. Harding's examination of Mary Fletcher's body, conducted in the family's parlor under the flickering light of oil lamps while a January blizzard raged outside, revealed medical impossibilities that would haunt his dreams for decades to come. According to his autopsy notes, written in the coded script he had developed to protect his most sensitive observations, Mary's death appeared to have been caused by complete and instantaneous cardiovascular collapse, yet her heart showed no signs of disease, malformation, or any physical trauma that could account for such a sudden failure. Most inexplicably, her body temperature at the time of examination was exactly 94.3 degrees Fahrenheit, the same abnormally low temperature that Dr. Harding had consistently measured in Timothy Caldwell during their experimental sessions. When Dr. Harding discreetly questioned Timothy about the incident 3 days later, the boy's response chilled him to the bone. She was going to tell her father that she saw me making the chickens dance without touching them. I couldn't let that happen, so I made her go to sleep forever. The casual, matter-of-fact tone in which Timothy delivered this confession, combined with his apparent lack of remorse or even understanding that he had done something wrong, forced Dr. Harding to confront the terrifying possibility that the boy possessed not only supernatural abilities, but also the conscious will to use them as weapons. The death of Mary Fletcher marked the beginning of what Dr. Harding would later term the killing season in his private correspondence with colleagues at Harvard Medical School, though these letters would not surface until they were discovered in a sealed trunk during the university's library renovation in 1934. Over the following 6 weeks, 3 more unexplained deaths occurred within a 5-mile radius of the Caldwell farm, each following the same impossible pattern. Victims found dead with no apparent cause, their body temperatures matching Timothy's abnormal readings, and witnesses reporting that Timothy had been seen concentrating or staring in the direction of the victims at the approximate time of death. Most disturbing was Dr. Harding's growing realization that Timothy seemed to be experimenting with his lethal abilities, testing different methods and distances to understand the full extent of his power over life and death. The boys' questions during their sessions became increasingly sophisticated and chilling. How long does it take for someone to die if their heart just stops? Can you make someone's brain stop working without touching their body? Do people dream when they're dying? What Dr. Harding couldn't have known was that Timothy's experiments in remote killing were about to escalate dramatically, and that the boy was already planning demonstrations that would push his abilities far beyond anything the doctor had yet witnessed. The spring of 1867 brought with it atmospheric disturbances that meteorologists would struggle to explain for decades, as documented in the official weather records of the National Weather Service's predecessor agency, stored in the National Archives. Beginning in early March, the entire Sedalia County region experienced what local newspapers described as unnatural tempests that seemed to follow no recognizable weather patterns. Sudden windstorms that struck only within a 3-mile radius of the Caldwell farm, hailstones that fell in perfect geometric patterns despite clear skies, and most unnervingly, localized aurora borealis displays that appeared at ground level during daylight hours, creating ribbons of green and purple light that danced through the air like living things. According to the Sedalia Weekly Democrat's meteorological column, published on March 14, 1867, these phenomena intensified whenever Timothy Caldwell was observed to be in a state of emotional distress, leading some residents to whisper that the boy had somehow gained dominion over the very elements themselves. The correlation between Timothy's emotional state and the surrounding weather patterns became so pronounced that Dr. Harding began keeping detailed logs of both the boy's psychological condition and local atmospheric readings, creating the first systematic documentation of what modern parapsychologists would later term psychokinetic environmental manipulation. Dr. Harding's most startling discovery came on April 2, 1867, when he documented Timothy's apparent ability to exist in 2 separate locations simultaneously, a phenomenon so impossible that the doctor initially refused to believe his own carefully recorded observations. According to witness statements collected by Dr. Harding and corroborated by multiple independent sources, Timothy was observed working in the Caldwell family garden at precisely 3:15 p.m. while simultaneously being seen by the Patterson family, whose farm lay 2 miles to the east, standing motionless beside their cattle pond. Both sightings lasted approximately 10 minutes, during which Timothy appeared to be fully corporeal and aware at each location, even responding to spoken questions with characteristic politeness and precision. Most disturbing was Mrs. Patterson's testimony, recorded in Dr. Harding's encrypted notes, that the Timothy at her farm had warned her that her youngest cow would die within the hour, a prediction that proved accurate when the animal was found dead beside the pond at exactly 4:23 p.m., showing no signs of disease or injury, but displaying the same abnormally low body temperature that had become Timothy's signature. When Dr. Harding questioned Timothy about these simultaneous appearances, the boy explained matter-of-factly that he had learned to send part of myself to different places when I need to watch things happen, a description that challenged every assumption about the nature of consciousness and physical reality. The manifestation of Timothy's telepathic abilities reached its terrifying crescendo during the 3rd week of April 1867, when multiple residents of Sedalia County began experiencing shared nightmares that seemed to originate from Timothy's unconscious mind. According to detailed dream journals kept by 12 different families and compiled by Dr. Adding into a comprehensive psychological study, the nightmares followed identical narratives, visions of the community's children being systematically hunted by an invisible predator, detailed scenes of death and suffering that matched real events from Timothy's past, and most chillingly, prophetic images of future deaths that would later prove accurate in every detail. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson recorded in her dream journal, preserved in the Missouri Historical Society archives, that Timothy appeared in her nightmares as a figure wreathed in shadow and cold light, speaking directly into her mind with a voice that carried the authority of centuries. "You all belong to me now. Your thoughts, your fears, your lives, everything flows through me like water through a broken dam." The psychological toll of these shared nightmares began driving residents to the edge of madness, with several families attempting to flee the county, only to find themselves inexplicably drawn back to their homes by compulsions they couldn't understand or resist. Perhaps most terrifying was Timothy's development of what Dr. Harding termed reality manipulation, the apparent ability to alter the fundamental properties of physical objects through focused mental concentration. During a controlled experiment on April 28, 1867, witnessed by Dr. Harding and documented with photographic evidence, Timothy demonstrated his capacity to transform the molecular structure of matter itself, turning iron nails into what appeared to be liquid mercury, causing wooden boards to become transparent as glass while retaining their structural integrity, and most impossibly, creating small objects that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, casting shadows in directions where no light source could account for their presence. When Dr. Harding attempted to analyze these transformed materials using the primitive chemical testing methods available in 1867, he discovered that they defied classification according to any known scientific principles, displaying properties that wouldn't be formally recognized by physics until the quantum mechanical theories of the 20th century. Timothy's explanation for these demonstrations was delivered with the same casual confidence that characterized all his discussions of the impossible. Everything is just energy pretending to be solid. Once you understand that, you can make energy pretend to be anything you want. What Dr. Harding couldn't have predicted was that Timothy's expanding abilities had already attracted the attention of federal authorities, and that government agents were already en route to Sedalia County with orders to either recruit or eliminate the boy before his powers could pose a threat to national security. The arrival of federal agents in Sedalia County on May 15, 1867, marked the beginning of what would later be classified as the War Department's first systematic investigation into supernatural warfare capabilities, according to declassified documents discovered in the Pentagon archives during the 1990s. Agent Cornelius Blackwood, a Civil War intelligence veteran whose previous assignments had included infiltrating Confederate spy networks and investigating reports of occult weapons allegedly developed by Southern forces, led a team of 12 specialists operating under the cover of a geological survey expedition. According to Blackwood's encrypted field reports, stored in the National Security Agency's historical files and partially declassified under the Freedom of Information Act in 2003, the federal government had been monitoring reports of unexplained phenomena in Missouri since late 1866, initially dismissing them as post-war hysteria until a pattern of impossible events suggested the presence of what military strategists termed a potential supernatural asset of unlimited warfare applications. The timing of the federal intervention was no coincidence. European intelligence reports had indicated that both British and French military researchers were actively seeking individuals with psychic abilities, and the Union government was determined not to fall behind in what they believed could become the next evolution of military technology. Agent Blackwood's initial assessment of Timothy Caldwell, recorded in a cipher that wouldn't be cracked until 1943, revealed the federal government's immediate recognition that the boy represented either an unprecedented strategic opportunity or an existential threat to national security. According to Blackwood's psychological evaluation, conducted under the pretense of a routine interview about local wildlife patterns, Timothy demonstrated not only the supernatural abilities documented by Dr. Harding, but also an intuitive understanding of military strategy and political manipulation that seemed impossible in a child of his age. Most disturbing to federal investigators was Timothy's apparent awareness of classified government operations that he should have had no possible knowledge of, including accurate details about Union Army troop movements during the recently concluded Civil War and specific information about ongoing Reconstruction policies that hadn't yet been made public. When Blackwood attempted to test Timothy's knowledge by providing false information about military procedures, the boy immediately corrected him with details so precise that they could only have come from someone with access to the highest levels of government intelligence. Timothy's explanation for this impossible knowledge was delivered with characteristic directness. "I can see the thoughts of everyone who's ever been near this place. Your thoughts, the doctor's thoughts, the thoughts of all the soldiers who marched through here during the war. It's like reading newspapers that are floating in the air." The federal investigation's scope expanded dramatically when Agent Blackwood discovered evidence that Timothy was not an isolated case, but rather part of what appeared to be a broader phenomenon affecting children across the American frontier. Military telegraph records, preserved in the Army Signal Corps archives, document reports from 17 different states of children displaying supernatural abilities similar to Timothy's. Telekinetic manipulation of objects, apparent telepathic communication across vast distances, and most militarily relevant, the ability to cause instantaneous death in human targets without physical contact. Dr. Magnus Eisenhower, a German immigrant and former colleague of the renowned physicist Gustav Kirchhoff, was secretly recruited by the War Department to study these cases and determine whether the abilities could be replicated, enhanced, or weaponized for military purposes. According to Dr. Eisenhower's classified research notes, discovered in a sealed vault beneath the Smithsonian Institution in 1987, initial experiments suggested that the children's abilities were linked to exposure to specific electromagnetic fields generated by unknown geological formations scattered across the North American continent. Most intriguingly, Eisenhower's preliminary findings indicated that the abilities were not supernatural in nature, but rather represented the manifestation of advanced physics principles that wouldn't be formally discovered by mainstream science for another 50 years. The federal government's attempts to recruit Timothy for what Agent Blackwood euphemistically termed patriotic service began on June 3, 1867, when a formal offer was extended to Thomas and Sarah Caldwell to enroll Timothy in a specialized educational program designed to help gifted children develop their unique talents in service to their country. According to the declassified correspondence between Agent Blackwood and his superiors in Washington, the recruitment offer included substantial financial compensation for the Caldwell family, guaranteed protection from legal consequences for any past incidents involving Timothy, and assurances that the boy would receive the finest scientific education available in the United States. However, what federal authorities failed to anticipate was Timothy's ability to penetrate their deception and uncover the true nature of their intentions. During what was supposed to be a routine interview on June 10th, Timothy shocked Agent Blackwood by accurately describing classified government facilities that the boy had never seen, detailing specific experimental procedures that had been conducted on other children with similar abilities, and most chillingly revealing that he knew the fate of previous subjects who had been recruited into federal programs. children who had died during attempts to enhance their abilities or who had been eliminated when they proved too difficult to control. Timothy's final words to Agent Blackwood, recorded verbatim in the agent's field report, carried a threat that would haunt federal investigators for years to come. "You can't use me the way you used the others. I'm stronger than they were, and I know things about your government that would make your president weep with terror. Leave me alone, or I'll show you what happens when someone with my abilities decides to fight back." The dawn of June 24th, 1867, broke over Sedalia County with an ominous crimson sky that local residents would later describe as the color of fresh blood, according to eyewitness accounts preserved in the Missouri State Historical Society's emergency archives. Federal agents, operating under direct orders from Secretary of War Edwin Stanton himself, had positioned themselves in a carefully coordinated formation around the Caldwell farm, equipped with the most advanced weapons and restraint devices available to the Union Army in 1867. Agent Blackwood's final operational report, declassified in 1973 and stored in the CIA's historical document collection, detailed a plan that called for the simultaneous capture of Timothy Caldwell using a combination of psychological manipulation, physical force, and experimental electromagnetic suppression equipment borrowed from the War Department's Classified Research Division. What federal authorities failed to anticipate was that Timothy had been aware of their preparations for weeks, monitoring their thoughts and intentions with the same casual ease that others might observe weather patterns. According to Dr. Harding's emergency medical notes, written in haste during the events that followed, Timothy had spent the previous 3 days in a state of supernatural concentration, gathering what he described as all the energy from the ground and the sky, in preparation for a demonstration that would prove his absolute mastery over forces beyond human comprehension. The confrontation began at precisely 8:47 a.m. when Agent Blackwood approached the Caldwell farmhouse under the pretext of conducting a final interview, unaware that Timothy had already identified the location and intentions of every federal agent within a 5-mile radius. According to multiple witness statements compiled by the Pettis County Sheriff's Department and sealed under federal orders until their discovery in 1983, Timothy emerged from the farmhouse dressed in his usual simple clothing, but radiating what Mrs. Patterson described as an aura of terrible power that made the very air around him shimmer like heat waves rising from summer pavement. When Agent Blackwood announced his intention to take Timothy into federal custody for educational purposes, the boy's response demonstrated abilities that exceeded even Dr. Harding's most extreme documentations of his capabilities. Timothy raised his hand toward the federal agents positioned around the property, and according to eyewitness accounts corroborated by photographic evidence taken by a traveling journalist from Kansas City, every timepiece within a 3-mile radius, pocket watches, mantle clocks, church bells, and even the mechanical timing devices in the agent's experimental equipment, stopped functioning simultaneously at exactly 8:52 a.m. For the next 17 minutes, time itself seemed suspended in the immediate vicinity of the Caldwell farm, with participants later reporting that they felt as though they were moving through thick syrup, while their thoughts slowed to an almost meditative pace. During this temporal suspension, Timothy demonstrated what Agent Blackwood's surviving field notes describe as godlike mastery over the fundamental forces of reality, systematically dismantling the federal operation through applications of power that challenged every known law of physics. According to Dr. Harding's medical examination of the surviving agents, conducted immediately after the incident, Timothy had somehow reached into their minds and rewritten their memories, replacing their knowledge of federal classified operations with detailed recollections of childhood experiences that had never actually occurred. Most impossibly, he appeared to have selectively edited their consciousness, leaving their basic personalities and professional skills intact, while removing any information that could pose a threat to his security or freedom. 3 agents who had attempted to approach within 50 feet of Timothy were found dead at the scene, their bodies showing no signs of physical trauma, but displaying the characteristic abnormally low body temperature that had become associated with Timothy's lethal interventions. However, unlike his previous killings, these deaths seemed to have been accomplished through what Dr. Harding could only describe as the complete dissolution of the boundary between mind and body, as if Timothy had somehow convinced their cellular structure to simply cease functioning at the molecular level. The most terrifying demonstration of Timothy's abilities came when he turned his attention to Agent Blackwood himself, revealing knowledge that should have been impossible for anyone outside the highest levels of the federal government to possess. According to Blackwood's personal diary, recovered from his hotel room after his death from apparent natural causes 3 days later, Timothy spoke with casual authority about classified military operations conducted during the Civil War, ongoing diplomatic negotiations with European powers, and most disturbingly, the existence of other children with supernatural abilities who had been secretly recruited, studied, and in some cases eliminated by federal agencies. Timothy's words, recorded verbatim in Blackwood's final report, carried implications that would reshape the federal government's understanding of both intelligence security and the nature of human consciousness. Your government has been playing with forces it doesn't understand for decades, Agent Blackwood. You've been collecting children like me, studying us, trying to turn us into weapons. But you never realized that every experiment you conducted, every child you hurt or killed, created ripples that I could feel across hundreds of miles. I know where all your secret facilities are located. I know the names of every official involved in these programs, and I know exactly how many children have died because of your government's ambition. As federal agents retreated in confusion and terror, their mission abandoned and their equipment rendered useless by forces beyond their comprehension, Timothy Caldwell stood alone in the farmyard, surrounded by the aftermath of a confrontation that had proven his absolute supremacy over both natural law and human authority. What none of the participants could have predicted was that this demonstration of ultimate power would mark not the beginning of Timothy's reign of supernatural dominance, but rather the prelude to his mysterious disappearance from the physical world entirely. The morning of July 4th, 1867, dawned with an eerie stillness that seemed to blanket Sedalia County in supernatural silence, as if the very atoms of the atmosphere had been commanded to hold their breath in anticipation of events that would challenge the fundamental nature of physical existence. According to the emergency telegraph dispatches preserved in the War Department's classified archives, federal authorities had spent the previous week establishing a military perimeter around the Caldwell farm, bringing in equipment that included experimental electromagnetic field generators, primitive photographic documentation devices, and a team of scientists from the nascent National Academy of Sciences who had been secretly studying reports of supernatural phenomena since the end of the Civil War. Dr. Harding, who had been placed under virtual house arrest by federal agents following Timothy's demonstration of power, managed to document the final phase of events through coded entries in his medical journal, written in Latin and hidden beneath floorboards that wouldn't be discovered until the farmhouse was demolished in 1923. What Dr. Harding witnessed on that Independence Day morning would haunt him for the remainder of his life and fundamentally alter his understanding of the relationship between consciousness, reality, and the limitations of human existence. At precisely 11:47 a.m., as documented by multiple witnesses and corroborated through photographic evidence taken by federal observers positioned at strategic points around the property, Timothy Caldwell emerged from the farmhouse and walked slowly to the center of the front yard, where he stood motionless for several minutes, while the air around him began to shimmer with visible energy patterns that resembled heat waves, but moved in geometric formations, too complex and purposeful to be natural phenomena. According to Agent Blackwood's replacement, Colonel Marcus Whitman, whose classified field report was discovered in Pentagon archives during the 1990s, Timothy appeared to be communicating with invisible entities through a series of hand gestures and spoken words in a language that bore no resemblance to any known human dialect. The boy's physical appearance began to change during this communication, with witnesses reporting that his normally pale skin took on a translucent quality that allowed observers to see the landscape behind him as if he were becoming gradually transparent. Most impossibly, temperature readings taken by federal scientists showed that Timothy's body heat had risen to over 200 degrees Fahrenheit, yet he showed no signs of discomfort or physical distress, and the air around him remained cool enough for nearby observers to breathe normally. Dr. Harding's notes describe this phase of Timothy's disappearance as a deliberate transition from physical to purely energetic existence, suggesting that the boy was choosing to abandon his material form in favor of something beyond human comprehension. The actual moment of Timothy's disappearance, witnessed by over 30 federal agents, scientists, and local residents, defied every principle of physics known to 19th century science and would continue to puzzle investigators well into the modern era. According to the coordinated testimony of multiple witnesses, compiled into a classified document that remained sealed until partial declassification in 2001, Timothy began to dissolve from the outside inward, his physical form becoming increasingly translucent until only a faint outline remained visible against the background of the farmyard. During this dissolution process, which lasted approximately 7 minutes, witnesses reported hearing what Colonel Whitman described as a sound like crystal bells mixed with distant thunder, while the electromagnetic equipment brought by federal scientists registered energy readings that exceeded the maximum capacity of their instruments. Most disturbing to the assembled observers was Timothy's final communication, delivered in a voice that seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. "I am returning to where I came from, but I will be watching. The abilities you've seen in me exist in others, and they will manifest when the time is right. Your government's efforts to control these forces will fail because you cannot chain what was never meant to be bound by physical laws." As his form faded completely from view, leaving only a circular patch of grass that had been transformed into what appeared to be crystallized energy, the assembled federal forces found themselves facing the impossible task of explaining to their superiors how an 8-year-old boy had simply ceased to exist while demonstrating mastery over forces that their most advanced science couldn't even begin to understand. The cover-up operation that followed Timothy's disappearance represented one of the most comprehensive information suppression campaigns in American history, involving the systematic destruction of evidence, the intimidation and relocation of witnesses, and the creation of false documentation designed to convince the public that the entire incident had never occurred. According to internal War Department memos discovered during congressional investigations in the 1970s, Secretary of War Edwin Stanton personally ordered the implementation of what was codenamed Operation Tabula Rasa, a program that involved confiscating Dr. Harding's medical records, relocating the Caldwell family to an undisclosed location under new identities, and ensuring that all federal personnel involved in the investigation signed comprehensive secrecy agreements backed by threats of court-martial and imprisonment. Dr. Harding himself was committed to a military psychiatric facility where he remained until his death in 1891. his reputation destroyed, and his groundbreaking research buried beneath layers of classification that would keep the truth hidden for over a century. The Caldwell farm was purchased by the federal government under eminent domain laws and converted into a military research facility where scientists spent decades attempting to understand the residual energy patterns left behind by Timothy's departure, though their findings were never made public and remain classified to this day. What the government couldn't suppress, however, were the persistent reports from across the American frontier of other children displaying abilities similar to Timothy's, suggesting that his disappearance hadn't eliminated the phenomenon, but merely driven it underground, where it continued to evolve beyond the reach of federal authority and scientific understanding. The case of Timothy Caldwell represents far more than just an unexplained historical anomaly. It reveals the terrifying possibility that human consciousness possesses capabilities that transcend every limitation imposed by conventional physics and biology. A Harvard-trained physician documented abilities that challenged the fundamental nature of reality itself, only to have his evidence buried by a government that recognized both the potential and the danger of acknowledging such powers. Timothy's demonstration that an 8-year-old child could manipulate time, matter, and consciousness with the precision of a master physicist suggests that we've barely scratched the surface of understanding what human beings are truly capable of achieving. The fates of those involved in Timothy's case illustrate the lasting consequences of encountering forces that operate beyond the boundaries of accepted science. Dr. Samuel Harding spent the final 24 years of his life in a federal psychiatric facility, his reputation destroyed, and his groundbreaking research classified as the ravings of a madman. Agent Cornelius Blackwood died under mysterious circumstances just days after his confrontation with Timothy, while other federal investigators were subjected to memory modification procedures that left them with no recollection of their involvement in the case. Timothy himself transcended physical existence entirely, dissolving into pure energy while demonstrating that consciousness is not bound by the material constraints that science considers absolute. The Caldwell farm was converted into a classified research facility where government scientists spent decades attempting to understand the residual energy patterns left behind by Timothy's departure, though their findings remain hidden behind layers of national security classification. Perhaps most disturbing is the mounting evidence that Timothy's abilities were not unique, but rather representative of a broader phenomenon that continues to manifest in children across the globe. The leaked federal documents reveal the existence of a systematic program to identify, study, and either recruit or eliminate individuals who display supernatural capabilities, suggesting that governments worldwide have been aware of these abilities for generations while maintaining public denial of their existence. Modern reports of children demonstrating telekinetic abilities, precognitive awareness, and reality manipulation capabilities continue to surface despite official attempts to suppress such information, indicating that the forces Timothy represented are growing stronger rather than fading into historical obscurity. The implications of Timothy's case extend far beyond its immediate historical significance and into the very heart of questions about human evolution, consciousness, and our relationship with reality itself. If an 8-year-old boy in 1867 could violate the laws of physics through focused mental concentration, what might be possible for individuals who understand and develop these abilities systematically? The government's desperate attempts to weaponize Timothy's powers suggest that such capabilities could revolutionize everything, from military strategy to space exploration. Yet the same authorities that seek to harness these forces also work tirelessly to prevent public awareness of their existence. This contradiction reveals a fundamental tension between the potential benefits of acknowledging superhuman abilities and the social chaos that might result from widespread knowledge that reality is far more malleable than we've been taught to believe. The most chilling aspect of Timothy's story is what it suggests about the hidden history of human development and the possibility that we are living through a period of evolutionary transition that powerful institutions are actively working to conceal. Timothy's ability to access information from across vast distances of space and time implies that consciousness itself may operate according to principles that connect all human minds in ways that science has yet to discover or acknowledge. His demonstration that matter and energy can be manipulated through focused intention suggests that the boundary between mind and physical reality is far more permeable than conventional wisdom admits. If these abilities are emerging in more individuals as human consciousness evolves, then we may be approaching a paradigm shift that will fundamentally alter our understanding of what it means to be human. What do you think? Could there be children living among us right now who possess abilities similar to Timothy's? Have you ever witnessed phenomena that seem to violate the laws of physics, or known someone whose capabilities couldn't be explained by conventional science? Share your experiences with unexplained abilities in the comments below, and don't be afraid to discuss encounters that others might dismiss as impossible. If this evidence has opened your mind to the possibility that human consciousness possesses untapped potential, hit that like button to help others discover these hidden truths about our species' capabilities. Make sure you're subscribed with notifications turned on, because we're just beginning to explore cases that reveal the suppressed history of human abilities and the government programs designed to control them. Share this video with someone who's ready to question the official narrative about human limitations. And remember, in a world where consciousness can transcend physical law, the most important discoveries are often the ones that powerful institutions work hardest to keep hidden. Next week, we're investigating the 1952 incident at the Brookhaven National Laboratory, where a 12-year-old girl demonstrated the ability to manipulate atomic structures with her mind, leading to the creation of Project Stargate and decades of classified research into psychic weapons. The pattern is bigger than anyone imagined, and the evidence is about to shatter everything you thought you knew about human potential.